Hey guys, Tanaki, we begin the remarkable story about Pompeii. Before you comfortable like and subscribe the video, and if you really enjoy, let me in the comment section before start the story. Dim your lights and turn on fan for calm and better background. The year was 78 AD, just a year before destiny sealed Pompeii's fate forever. At the foot of the mighty volcano Vesuvius, the city bustled with life. Its streets were paved with heavy stones worn smooth by the wheels of carts, its houses adorned with frescoes of gods, feasts, and pleasures, its people as varied as any modern metropolis, merchants, sailors, farmers, aristocrats, slaves, and foreigners passing through. To walk into Pompeii was to walk into a miniature Rome, a provincial jewel where wealth from trade, agriculture, and culture converged. And at the very heart of this world was something the Romans considered both ordinary and essential: pleasure. Unlike much of today's world, where discussions of sex are hushed, moralized, or hidden, the Romans wore their erotic culture openly. Sexual imagery decorated homes, shops, bathhouses, and temples. Phallic amulets hung above doorways not as vulgar jokes but as charms against evil. Erotic graffiti sprawled across the walls in the same casual way a teenager today might carve their name into a desk. And in Pompeii, nowhere reflected this world of unashamed desire more than its brothels. The beating heart of a Roman port city, Pompeii was more than just a sleepy provincial town. With a population of around 12,000, it was a thriving port city on the Bay of Naples. Ships came in daily, unloading goods from Spain, North Africa, Egypt, and Greece. With goods came sailors and merchants, men far from home, men with money in their pockets and needs on their minds. The city's taverns, bathhouses, and street stalls thrived on this influx. But beyond food and wine, sailors and traders sought another kind of comfort: human intimacy, whether fleeting or passionate. It is in this environment that Pompeii's brothels flourished. Unlike in later centuries where brothels were often hidden in shadows, in Pompeii they were public, central, and unapologetic. The most famous of them all, the Lupanar, from the Latin word lupa, meaning a she-wolf, a slang term for prostitute, stood just steps away from the Forum, the very center of civic life. Roman attitudes towards sex. To truly understand what it was like to visit a brothel in Pompeii, we must first step into the Roman mind. For the Romans, sex was not merely private pleasure, it was a social and even political act. Masculinity was measured not by who you loved, but by the role you played. Besides itself, respectable Roman men were expected to be the active partner, the penetrator in sexual encounters. Who or what they penetrated, be it wife, slave, or prostitute, mattered less than maintaining that role of dominance. Women, meanwhile, lived in a double world. Respectable wives were expected to remain faithful, modest, devoted to the household gods, but prostitutes, slaves, and entertainers existed as outlets for male desire, and society rarely pretended otherwise. This cultural framework made Pompeii's brothels something far more complex than simple dens of sin. They were institutions of Roman masculinity, places where class, power, money, and lust collided. Walking through Pompeii's streets, let us imagine ourselves as travelers in Pompeii on a hot summer day in 78 AD. The sun beats down on the stone streets, and the air is filled with the mixed aromas of baking bread, fermenting wine, roasting meat, and the less pleasant scent of sewage channels running beneath the pavement. Shops line the streets. A baker selling round loaves stamped with his insignia, a wine shop with clay amphorae stacked to the ceiling, a fuller's workshop where clothes are being washed in tubs of urine collected from public jars. People bustle around us, matrons draped in flowing stolas, children darting between carts, and slaves carrying amphorae on their shoulders. And there, carved into the stones or painted on walls, are erotic symbols guiding the way. A carved phallus points toward the brothel, acting as an unmistakable signpost for any man looking for release. Graffiti, some crude, some poetic, hint at the pleasures that await. I had a girl here, and she made me forget the sea. A successus was here. He had a good time. Pompeii did not hide its sexuality. It celebrated it. The Lupanar, Pompeii's most famous brothel, the Lupanar, stood in the bustling eastern quarter of the city. Unlike discreet establishments of later ages, this brothel was boldly constructed, with 2 floors and stone beds and 10 small rooms. The ground floor housed working rooms for prostitutes, while the upper floor likely served wealthier clients who could afford more privacy and comfort. What truly sets the Lupanar apart are its frescoes. Painted above the doorways of the rooms were vivid erotic scenes, graphic depictions of couples engaged in every imaginable act. These frescoes serve not as decoration alone, but as a kind of visual menu. For many clients, sailors, traders, or slaves who might not even speak Latin, pictures spoke louder than words. The walls of the brothel are also inscribed with dozens of pieces of graffiti. Some are advertisements, some are reviews, some are simply declarations of pleasure. In these words and drawings, we hear the voices of Pompeii's forgotten men and women, echoing across 2,000 years. Sex slavery and survival. The women of Pompeii's brothels were not independent courtesans living glamorous lives. Most were enslaved women, bought and sold from across the empire. Greek, Syrian, Spanish, Gallic. They were property, owned by a pimp or brothel keeper, their bodies rented out for the profit of another. The cost of their services was astonishingly low. Just 2 asses, the price of a loaf of bread or a cup of cheap wine. For many clients, this was a quick transaction, over in minutes. For the women, it was survival, a cycle of endless encounters with strangers, sometimes dozens in a day. And yet, within this world, humanity persisted. Graffiti reveals moments of affection, jokes, rivalries between prostitutes, even claims of love. It reminds us that behind every transaction were human beings, desiring, suffering, laughing, enduring. A city of desire. To visit Pompeii's brothels was not to step into a secret underworld, but to participate in an open and accepted part of life. The city itself seemed to conspire in this acceptance. Phallic symbols decorated taverns, baths, even bakeries. Erotic art adorned homes from the wealthiest villas to the humblest dwellings. Pleasure was woven into the fabric of Pompeii, and the brothel stood at its very center. The most famous brothel in Pompeii is the Lupanar, located just a short walk from the bustling Forum, the political and commercial hub of the city. The name comes from lupa, meaning she-wolf, a slang word the Romans used for prostitutes. To the Roman ear, calling a brothel a wolf den carried no shame. It was simply what it was, a place where men went to satisfy desire in women, or men were there to provide it. Walking toward the Lupanar, a traveler would notice something curious, phallic symbols carved into the pavement stones and painted on walls, pointing in its direction. These weren't crude jokes, but practical markers as useful to a foreign sailor as a tavern sign. Once inside, the visitor would find a compact but efficient building, 2 floors, 10 small rooms. Each room on the ground floor was furnished with a simple stone bed, covered with straw or a thin mattress. The upper floor, accessed by a wooden staircase, offered slightly larger rooms with wooden beds and perhaps better furnishings, reserved for wealthier clients who could afford more privacy. But the real wonder of the Lupanar was not the architecture. It was the art on its walls, the erotic frescoes. Pompeii's a menu above the doors of the rooms. Frescoes depicted explicit scenes of sexual activity, men and women in every position imaginable. Scholars debate their purpose. Led into a room, he sees the small stone bed, covered with straw. A flickering oil lamp casts long shadows. For a brief time, minutes perhaps, he indulges in desire. When it is over, he leaves, another man already waiting his turn. It is quick, impersonal, transactional. Yet for many men, it was also a moment of release, of connection in a world where life was often hard and short. Graffiti, voices from the past. One of the most fascinating aspects of Pompeii's brothels is the graffiti left behind. Scratched into plaster, scrawled with charcoal, these messages are a time capsule of desire, humor, and human vulnerability. Some are boasts. I screwed many girls here. Some are romantic. A successes loves Iris, may she love him back. Some are practical. Amelia cost 2 asses. Together they form a chorus of voices across the centuries, whispering the same human needs and follies that still drive us today. The brothel is a social space. While the primary purpose of the brothel was obvious, it also served as a social hub. Men gathered there not just for sex, but for camaraderie, to drink, joke, and boast. In a society where public masculinity mattered, visiting a brothel could even be seen as a performance of manhood. Yet it was also a place where class divisions blurred. A freedman might find himself in the same room as a sailor, both paying the same price, both seeking the same thing. For a brief moment, wealth and status mattered less than desire. Beyond the Lupanar, it is important to note that the Lupanar was not the only brothel in Pompeii. Archaeologists have identified at least 25 buildings that may have functioned as smaller brothels or private rooms for prostitution. Some were taverns with back rooms, others were houses where sex was sold on the side. This suggests that prostitution was not a hidden corner of Pompeii's life, but a widespread and integrated aspect of the city's culture. Wherever men gathered, taverns, bathhouses, marketplaces, sex was never far away. The harsh reality, and yet, behind the exotic frescoes and playful graffiti, the reality of Pompeii's brothels was harsh. For the women, there was little glamour, little choice. They were commodities in a system that valued their bodies only for what they could provide. Their lives were short, their health precarious, their futures uncertain. Even so, their presence shaped Pompeii. They were the silent engines of its economy of pleasure, the unacknowledged but essential figures in its story. Without them, the brothels would not have existed, and Pompeii's reputation as a city of desire would have been far different. A city comfortable with desire in the end. What makes Pompeii's brothels so fascinating is not merely the sex that occurred within them, but the way the city embraced their existence. Unlike later societies that hid or condemned prostitution, Pompeii placed its brothel in plain sight, decorated it with art, and allowed its citizens to leave their comments on the wall. To visit a brothel in Pompeii was to step into a place that was both ordinary and extraordinary. A routine part of Roman life, yet preserved in such vivid detail that it continues to astonish us 2,000 years later. The streets of Pompeii are alive with noise and color as the sun dips behind Mount Vesuvius. Merchants pack up their stalls, the scent of roasted nuts and garum sauce still hanging in the air. From taverns spill the sounds of drunken laughter, dice clattering on wooden tables and musicians strumming lutes for coin. For the weary sailor just in from the port, or the young freedman with a few asses in his pouch, this is the perfect hour to seek release. The baths have cleansed his body, wine has loosened his spirit, and now his thoughts turn to the pleasures promised by the Lupanar. Following the carved phallic markers on the street, he makes his way down a side lane. The noise of the forum fades, replaced by the soft murmur of men coming and going. The sound of sandals on stone has arrived. Entering the wolf den, the doorway to the Lupanar is not hidden. It is wide and open, beckoning like a tavern door. The city hums around him, the cries of street vendors, the clatter of dice in taverns, the distant music of flutes. He is lighter by a few coins, heavier with the memory of his visit. Perhaps he returns to his lodgings satisfied. Perhaps he boasts to friends in the baths the next morning. Perhaps he writes his own name on the wall of the brothel, adding his voice to the chorus of centuries. For him it was an evening's indulgence. For us, it is a glimpse into a world where sex was open, ordinary, and unapologetic. The brothel as a mirror of Pompeii, the experience of visiting a Pompeian brothel was more than a transaction. It reflected the very essence of the city, its openness to pleasure, its mingling of classes, its casual acceptance of sex as part of life. It also reflected its harsh realities, slavery, exploitation, the lives of women reduced to commodities. The frescoes may dazzle us, the graffiti may amuse us, but behind them lay human stories of endurance, survival, and lost dignity. Yet in the silence of those stone rooms, preserved by ash for 2 millennia, we can still sense the presence of those who lived, laughed, desired, and suffered. The experience of visiting a brothel in Pompeii is not just history. It is a window into humanity itself. A step beyond, but Pompeii's sexual world did not end at the doors of the Lupanar. The city was alive with other spaces of desire. Taverns where sex was sold alongside wine, bathhouses where glances led to encounters, temples where sacred eroticism blended with worship. To understand Pompeii's erotic life fully, we must move beyond the brothel into the wider world of Roman pleasure. On August 24, 79 AD, the city of Pompeii, with all its laughter, commerce, desires, and secrets, was silent. Erotic jokes decorated taverns. Brothels stood near the forum, not in the shadows. At the same time, they force us to confront uncomfortable truths. The women who worked there had no freedom. They were slaves, exploited and discarded.